Hi, and welcome back to Guff Stuff Weekly Podcast. I'm Javan, and I have a couple guests with me today. Why don't we start with you, Connor?
Hey everyone, I'm Connor. BloodRedSakura on Twitch. I play a lot of fighting games, a lot of Souls games. Here to talk about Souls games today.
Perfect. And we also have Luke.
Hi, I'm Luke, also known as the Eldritch Pimp. You can find me at theeldritchpimp.com. Also here to geek out about Souls games.
All right. So, from the very get-go, Souls games, yeah, Souls games cover a lot of. It's its own genre now, so to speak, and that kind of came about because of things like. What were some of the first games that came out that defined the Souls-like genre? Do you guys have any? I mean, Demon Souls comes to mind for me, but was there anything else?
Yeah, Demon Souls is kind of where it started to gain mainstream attention because that game was just so much different from what was coming out at the time. But you can trace the lineage back to FromSoft's earlier games like Kingsfield, which has kind of the formula available, a lot of player choice, a lot of hey, do this and you die type stuff.
Okay.
But it's a first person game, so it's a little bit different.
And then, Luke, how would you define what a Souls-like is? Like, what makes a Souls-like? Because I think you've, if I'm not mistaken, you played the most Souls-like, not FromSoft specifically, but Souls-like. Like, you've played, like, Code Vein and other stuff like that. So what's the general definition of a Souls-like game, in your opinion?
I'd say it's definitely just a third-person action game with, how do I say it? It's like a bunch of different, it's almost like dungeon runs, essentially. Like, you go through each encounter at a time until you get from checkpoint to checkpoint.
Okay. Connor, would you have anything to add to that, or is that pretty fair?
My favorite definition, just that, but it adds a stamina bar on top of it, right? Some sort of like internal character resource management that you have to do. And I think that's what differentiates Souls-likes from something that's a lot more action heavy, like Devil May Cry or something like that, is that you're very internally limited on the amount of actions you can take.
Okay, yeah, so there's a player resource management system as well.
Right.
Some of the other elements I think that are important in Souls-like, and this is from my experience, I have played a few, but not a ton, which is why I have you two here. To me, a non-linear gameplay is very important in Souls-like games. The idea that you can go this route or this route. This route might be the intended route and easier, but you can definitely go this route and go this way first. In example of Dark Souls 1, you can go down to the catacombs or up to the Undead Burg. Is that pretty common in most Souls-likes, or is that mostly just the FromSoft?
I'd say that's pretty common in most Souls-like. The pathing is more limited than you think in most Souls games. Like, a lot of them feel very linear. Like, the fact that Dark Souls allows you to take either one of two paths, like, yeah, you got more variety, but it's also still like the same linear progression that you go through.
Okay.
Yeah, Dark Souls 1 is kind of unique in that it gives you that choice right away and gives you it's almost the illusion of choice, because if anybody's gone down to the catacombs at base level, you just get smacked repeatedly. And you're allowed to beat your head against that wall, which I think is a hallmark of a Souls game. But you're really intended to go up to the Undead Burg, and once you get to like Sekiro, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, and Bloodborne, you really see a lot more linear progression being favored, with checkpoints, like Luke said, opening up in home areas to lead you back to other places. But you're really only progressing forward in one way.
Okay, so let's branch off here in a little bit. Let's talk specifically about FromSoft games, because that's the granddaddy, so to speak, of the progenitor of the genre, more or less. So
yeah, what do you want to know?
I guess what are the FromSoft games, and what are your guys' opinions on them? Let's start with the Soul series, just the base Dark Souls series. What do you guys Like, what's the rundown of them? What are they about? What are they essentially?
Mm. It's a test of endurance. Each of the games. It's pretty much every boss fight that you go through is a puzzle in and of itself, and you progressively build through the game. And sometimes the games like to repeat on like some of the tropes that they have. So like you'll have obviously like you'll have your fireplace, you'll have like your forest place, your building place, and it kind of depends on the game as well. But it's also like trying to tell you a story through the environment. Like you can get a good idea of what to expect from the encounter based on the environment from it. Like a good example is the smoldering lake in Dark Souls 3. It's a very like demon heavy environment, and you can kind of get the vibe that it's like, okay, everything leading up is going to be based around like the demons and what was happening, and it's also tying in all the lore that was around the demons like in through the Dark Souls series.
Okay.
It's like they're all telling like the repeating story.
Okay, so it's very, each of the games is thematically kind of tied together in their biomes and stuff like that, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, what's the brief gist of like the storyline? Because, and I do want to preface this with, the storyline isn't obvious in these games. A lot of times it's described through items, descriptions, or interactions with NPCs. There's no narrator necessarily feeding you information to tie the story together, and no journal to tie all your quests together. There are no quests. So let's go back to Connor. And Connor, what do you think the main like condensed story of the Dark Souls series is?
In the widest possible bucket you can put it in, all of the Souls games boil down to you are kind of a nameless hero with no innate abilities, and with Sekiro being an exception. But and your job is to kill God or kill whatever the most powerful being in this iteration of the world is. And usually you're granted some form of immortality where you're allowed to just beat your head against things. And to call back to what Luke said, each boss, each encounter is like a puzzle, and through repeated deaths you get more information until you're able to come up with a winning strategy against that puzzle.
Okay.
So you're not tested against game mechanics, you're tested against your ability to learn.
Right, and that's a big core feature of the
Yep.
Souls games is the intuition. You can't really just figure things out. You kind of have to fail a little bit and then intuit from there what you did wrong and improve on it the next time that you go through an area.
Yeah, the Souls games demand that you respect them and they respect you and your ability to problem solve, basically.
Okay.
So one of the reasons I really like them is there is an intended way, but they leave a lot of room for player expression in solving problems.
Right.
Like kicking enemies off ledges,
Yep.
or luring one enemy away, or using items that distract enemies. Like there's a lot of player expression that comes through in the options they give you.
Yeah, a couple that come to my mind for that specifically is who's the guy in the gold armor in Dark Souls 1?
Left track.
Yeah, that guy. He's if you try to fight him, he just kicks your ass.
Yeah.
But you can just boot him off the ledge and he's dead.
Yeah,
and so like
you
that's like the easiest problem solving, right? And then the other one is when you go down to the forest region, like below the garden, there's a Hydra down there, and like trying to fight that thing is a nightmare. But you can sit on a bridge and just shoot it with arrows and kill it, and it can't ever do anything to you. So yeah, the cheesy aspect of approaching things is really cool in my mind. So I guess like as far as Souls, like specifically the Dark Souls series, how do you guys like? What's your nostalgia for it? Like, when did you first start playing it? What is your like favorites of each of the games? Like, what are some awesome moments that you've had in them? I can start with playing Dark Souls 3 with you, Connor, and we did a fight club in the swamp, and we just kept having random people spawn in, and then 1v1, and like that's one of my favorite Souls moments of all time. It was just so much fun. How about you, Luke? What do you have for great Souls moments?
Oh God. I don't have like any memorable ones, but like you get a lot of flow state moments in the game where it's like you're very comfortable with the game. Like I've played the Dark Souls series ad nauseum, and it is one of those games where once you get the rhythm of it and you just start to just fly through encounters like a parry god, and you just there's I can't put a very it's a very satisfying feeling when you get to that point of the game. Sekiro is the game that really trained me into that. That game was an actual masterpiece.
Okay. Connor, how about you?
Um, so I got into the Soul series because a buddy of mine got back from a military deployment and basically kicked in the door of the house I was living in at the time. I was like, "Hey, whatever you're doing, stop. You're playing this now." Because he had discovered it through some buddies on deployment and was like, "This is going to be your jam. You don't know it yet, but I know this. Sit down and play this." And that was kind of it. Like, it was just sat down, started playing, loved the atmosphere, loved that it was really demanding in a way I didn't know I was looking for.
Okay.
But oftentimes incredibly fair. Like, you die when you mess up. You don't, a lot of the times. Like, you either
Yeah.
didn't notice something, you bit off more than you can chew, you went the wrong way. Like, a lot of your downfalls come from your decision making, which I really appreciate. And then over the years, I got more into, like, because this was back on Xbox 360 that I think I first played this.
Okay.
And I didn't even own it. But then I wound up buying the was it the Prepare to Die edition on PC and started doing co-op runs with my friends and fight clubs with my friends, and it just became a whole little community of people that I knew that played this game, and we all started to play together. Like, one of my favorite memories is when the remaster of Dark Souls 1 released. Me and a couple buddies figured out there's a spot on the bridge before Sif where if all the players are positioned correctly, invaders can only invade on one spot, or will only spawn in on one spot, and you can trap them on the bridge. So we put one person with a great shield on either side and two people with spears on the outside, trap them so they couldn't roll off the bridge and couldn't get away because there's no jump in that game, and then poke them to death. We had one poor soul land in our world 8 times, and we farmed him mercilessly.
Nice. Okay, so
Yeah.
that covers Dark Souls. Let's move on to the next one, which is Bloodborne. And I have not played Bloodborne. I've seen a lot of play of it. Luke, have you played Bloodborne?
I have not.
Okay. So Connor, you're the expert.
No.
You're the expert on Bloodborne here. What's Bloodborne about, and how is it different from Dark Souls?
So where Dark Souls is a dark fantasy game, Bloodborne is an homage to H.P. Lovecraft. It's very dark sci-fi. Like, it takes place in like Victorian era, nondescript Europe, in a town where it's eternally night for right now.
Okay.
And weird happenings are going on, like people turning into beasts. You start with a really is it Bram Stoker?
Yeah, Bram
Or
Stoker. Yeah.
You start with a really Bram Stoker aura where, like, you're in Victorian England, there are people turning into werewolves and you're fighting them and you're not really sure why.
I almost got like a Brothers Grimm kind of vibe from it.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. But by the end of it, you are fighting an elder god, like a literal eldritch horror.
So it
in
morphs into
a
the
dream.
Lovecraft kind of thing.
Yes. Like you there's a point at the game where it kind of switches from that kind of old-timey England werewolf aesthetic, like vampires and werewolves, to more alien squid-like sci-fi, like the unknowable things of the deep that
Right.
H.P. Lovecraft really emphasized in his works. Mechanically, it does a few things that are interesting. In Dark Souls, for your first game, you can get the Havel set, shield up, and you're good. Nothing will give you any issues. There is nothing like that in Bloodborne. You have to be aggressive. You have to be attacking. And by the end, the bosses are just giant HP sponges. They are obstacles that you hack away at slowly and methodically, but in a really frantic manner. it's hard to describe if you haven't had to beat some of these bosses like the Orphan of Kos and things like that. They're terrifying.
Okay. So we're not going to stay too long on Bloodborne because I know that
Yep.
both of you are really excited about the next one in the gauntlet. So we'll spend a little more time on that. And that's Sekiro. And
Sekiro.
I've heard you guys sing nothing but praises about this game. I've watched several playthroughs of Sekiro. Yeah, what's Sekiro about and why is it great? I'll let you two fight over who wants to gush over this.
Oh God.
You want me to give an overview, Luke?
Yeah, go ahead.
So Sekiro is what if you took Bloodborne's more frantically aggressive paced combat and plopped a rhythm game onto it and married the two in such a really satisfying way. Like Luke was talking about it earlier being a parry god, which I find a very, very high level enjoyment in the Soul series for parrying.
What is a parry god?
So most attacks in the Soul series and from Software games can be parried, where you, instead of blocking, you time a swing of your shield and you will open up the enemy for a critical strike. And it comes with a really definitive noise. The enemy usually sits to their butt or something, and you get a massive attack. It's a very satisfying. It's a very skillful play. You've timed things correctly. You know the enemy pattern enough. It's a display of mastery on whatever you're fighting.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
Sekiro.
yeah, so back to that. Yeah, sorry.
That's the base gameplay.
Okay.
You do very little damage to most enemies, almost negligible damage to a lot of enemies, and you are expected to vary attacking with parrying their attacks, which whittles down a posture bar, which then allows you to kill them in one strike, or sometimes 3 or 4, depending on the boss.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about. We have the overview of Sekiro. Let's talk about what you liked about it and why it's such a great game, Luke.
Oh, for one, it's beautiful. Like graphically, aesthetically, it is a work of art that you get to play through. And there is no place or scene in the game that is lacking in rich aesthetic, rich lore. It's very of its time because it's like right after feudal Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it just.
I think it's supposed to be right after the Warring States period, but I'm not totally sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and it captures all of that very well, and you sometimes forget that you're playing a Souls game, and you're just like almost like watching a samurai movie.
Okay, that's kind of cool.
It's really picturesque, and it has that Kurosawa effect. I think it's Kurosawa, the guy who is famous for like those old samurai movies.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Like Way of the Dragon and stuff.
Yeah.
And are you talking like Yojimbo too?
Yeah.
Okay.
He kind of popularized a lot of the samurai tropes that are still around today, like the standoff, they rush at each other, one slash, one person falls, that kind of stuff. I believe that's him.
Okay, cool. And then now we do you guys want to talk any more about Sekiro, or do you feel like we've covered it enough?
I mean, we could talk a lot about Sekiro.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's.
It's my favorite in the Soul series.
Let's stay a little bit longer on it. Sekiro, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, but they did something interesting where most Souls games didn't, where they added more cutscenes. Is that true?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sekiro is a lot more of a narrative tale, and that's kind of what makes it a lot different from the Souls series, where the Souls, like you said before, relies on kind of reading between the lines and digging for lore. Sekiro is trying to tell you something. It is trying to present a story to you. So you're playing in between the gaps of the story. So it's a more narrative-driven game, which is not From Software's hallmark.
Okay, but they did a good job on it.
Oh yeah, it's really good.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the game of the year, the best-selling FromSoft game of all time, the talk of the town, all the rage. One I have not played, but I intend to. Elden Ring.
DLC when?
DLC when?
Soon. Soon.
Luke, why don't you give us an overview of Elden Ring?
Yeah, so Elden Ring is a conglomeration of the Dark Souls or the FromSoft writer. What was his name? I'm blanking on it.
Miyazaki-san.
Yeah, Miyazaki-san, and who was it was George R. R. Martin that was in on it, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it's kind of like their love child, where like they collaborated on the story, and then they threw on the Dark Souls formula, but then made it like an open world adventure. So like versus like any other Dark Souls game or Souls game that you play where you feel it's very linear, Elden Ring is entirely open world. Like there
Okay.
is very little limitation on to where you can go and what you can fight. Granted, you are gated at some points, but other than that, like you have a huge swath of free reign to just do whatever you want and just explore.
So that's kind of a correction to what I said earlier then, where because when I think of like the non-linear, I think of Dark Souls 1 where it's kind of non-linear, but Elden Ring takes that and turns it up to 11 then, where you can actually just literally do whatever you want. All right, and then let's have Connor gush about Elden Ring a little bit.
So it's like, what if what's the latest Zelda game?
Breath
Tears
of the
of the
Wild.
Kingdom.
Yeah, it's like the Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, but nobody has a happy ending and everybody is suffering, and you got to go destroy them. And you'll never unsee this. The main like royal family, as it were, that you're kind of fighting against in Elden Ring, all of their initials spell out Germ. I hate it. It's or GRM.
Okay.
I hate it. I can't unsee it. But it takes a lot of what 3 did really well, which was like weapon arts and really cool things that you can do with some of these weapons, and plastered that everywhere, and then dropped a ton of really cool boss designs, really cool aesthetics. It leans back into the Western dark fantasy a lot more. There's a little bit of eldritch horror in it. It touches a little bit on Bloodborne, but the design is just, I think, a whole level up from Dark Souls 3, which is I think it's nearest contemporary.
Okay.
They give you a horse
Yeah.
and a jump
Yeah.
button.
Yeah,
That's the biggest thing. You get to jump.
Yeah, that was a big thing. All right. Well, we've gone for a fair while on it, so let's sum up these FromSoft games. What are, if you guys had to choose like some of your favorite bosses from the games, ones that really stuck out to you, which ones would you choose? I know personally my favorite boss I've ever fought, and I could be absolutely crucified for saying this, but it was Bed of Chaos from Dark Souls 1. And I liked it because it felt more like a puzzle than a fight. And it was more of like it was like a jump puzzle mixed with a timing puzzle. And it I don't know, I liked it. It was fun.
If the hitboxes weren't so incredibly punishing and incredibly jank, I might be able to say it's an okay boss fight. But I have lost so many times to that boss just going, lol,
And
I hit you.
I like
Don't know
that.
from where.
It's chaotic, right? Like it's Bed of Chaos. It
Yeah,
should
that's
be
true.
chaotic.
That's true.
Luke, why don't you start? What are some of your favorite bosses?
Okay, so I think my favorite boss of all time is Father Owl from Sekiro. Not the first time you fight him. I think that's the Great Shinobi Owl, but like Father Owl in the memory that you go into, that fight is so fun. I
Okay.
can like it because Father Owl is essentially Sekiro's teacher, so you end up seeing a lot of the same techniques that you know. He's essentially like he's mirroring you, but you're actually mirroring him because like he taught you all that stuff.
Right,
And it's just it's like you're fighting yourself essentially.
it's a
also
true student
grueling.
meets the master.
Yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's also maybe the hardest fight in that game and was considered one of the hardest fights in a From Software game until Elden Ring.
Okay.
And then like that's not even touching on like the final version of him that they threw into like their little gauntlet add-on to it, where they change up his move set, they add on different chains to his combos. It's an amazing fight and just very satisfying to finally beat.
Cool. Do you have any other ones you want to touch on? Like shout honorable
Uh,
mentions?
Yeah, honorable mentions, Radagon, Elden Beast. That was a very satisfying conclusion. And then just Gwyn from Dark Souls 1.
Yep. Yeah, he was a lot
Like
of
Piano
fun.
Bell.
the first time you fight him, it's always gonna be just a slog. But like once you understand like he can be parried, it's not even it's a joke at that point. But
Okay.
it's still a fun fight nonetheless because it's either get the parry down or he will one shot you damn near.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like that's the thrill of it. It's that high risk, high reward.
Right. Okay. Connor, how about you? What's your favorite if you have to choose, or honorable mentions and stuff like that?
I don't know if I have a single favorite. It really depends on what I'm in the mood for. But to build off Luke's high risk, high reward, one of my favorites is the ape from Sekiro. There's a second phase in that where the ape gains a sword, and there's a certain attack that he does where he raises the sword up, like stands straight up, and I mean we're talking like a 30-foot ape, stands straight up with his giant katana and slams it down on you, and it is a be right or be dead moment. The camera like zooms in so you're looking at the tip of the sword coming down at you, and it is parry that sword or die right now. And it is such a satisfying sequence to nail.
Okay.
Other than that, I thought Millennia was a lot of fun because she borders on. She makes you redo your entire character to fight her. She's so difficult, so punishing. The windows are so tight, and I had a lot of fun figuring out cheese strats, like because she'll dodge projectiles, but there are certain projectiles that are too slow because she's not actually dodging the projectile when it gets near. She's dodging when you fire. So if you use a slow moving projectile, it'll still track her. So like I had to really fine tune my magic because I did arcane for my first playthrough. Really had to fine tune my build and what I was bringing with and why I was using it to get through the first phase, and then the second phase started, and I had to do it again. So that was really fun. I think Gwyn is also a highlight. Like when Gwyn is built up to be this monstrous thing, this kind of paragon of the world, and when you enter the kiln and sad music starts to play,
Oh, that
and this
music
like
is just amazing.
yeah, and that husk turns at you, you're like, damn son, what happened? Like you and that first time you're gonna struggle because he does that first jump and you're not ready for it. I bet a lot of people die right then and there because he just turns, looks, and then he's on you.
Yeah, because he moves so slow, and it's like, what's he
Right.
doing? And then all of a sudden, boom, he's on you, and you're like, what
Yeah.
the heck just happened?
Yep. So I think that's a really well done fight. I always enjoy going back to that. Trying to think of something I can shout out in Dark Souls 2 because we haven't hardly talked about that at all.
Yeah.
What's that?
Fume Knight.
God, Fume Knight. Yeah, some of those bosses are really hard. Oh, I've got one. I've never beaten Sir Alon personally, but I had a friend who was trying to beat him on like New Game Plus 7 or something for the first time, and we were staying up rallying him, and it was like 4 in the morning at this point, and one of our other friends had passed out, and the guy playing finally beat him, and we turned around to the dude who was passed out. We're like, we did it, and he woke up and just shouted gibberish at us for a good 30 seconds. No words, no coherent sentence, and then just passed out again. Has no memory of this.
Nice.
So that's a fun one for me, just for that memory alone.
So after thinking on it a little bit more, I do really like Bed of Chaos, but I think Soul of Cinder in Dark Souls 3
good one.
might be my favorite, just because like he has elements of Gwyn mixed with like other crazy
All the
stuff.
other
Yeah.
chosen
Oh,
undead.
it's so cool. He's
Very
a
thematically
really
good.
and he's fairly unpredictable in my opinion because he has such
Yeah.
a broad move set. But yeah, so any final thoughts on the Souls-like series? We can talk a little bit about the Souls-likes. I think we touched on it a little bit. Have you played many Souls-likes, Connor, or have you played mostly just the FromSoft?
I played a few.
Okay.
No, I played a few.
Why don't you just give me
J-
a quick rapid fire of the Souls-likes you guys have played? Why don't we start with you, Connor? Do one, then Luke will do one, and we'll go back and forth.
Start with Luke. I gotta look up the full name of this.
All
So
right,
I
so
can
Luke, why don't
do it
you?
justice.
The one I'd like to shout out would be Dragon's Dogma.
Okay. And
That's another. Oh, are we just going back and forth?
no, yeah,
Thought of that.
give a little blip about it if you want.
Oh, yeah, no,
Interesting.
it's one of those games where it's like there's not a whole lot to it. It's an older game, so like there's not a lot of meat and potatoes to it. So it's very linear, but it's a very story driven, and it has something where it just draws you into it. It really has a way of hooking you into and then making you invest into that story.
Okay.
Interesting. I always had Dragon's Dogma pitched to me as more a Monster Hunter game. I hadn't heard too much about Dark Souls, so that's cool.
Yeah, as far as like your typical third person
Mhm.
action adventure where you just walk like just and then like some of the control schemes are kind of like they're a little bit different, but like
Mhm.
I feel like that's besides the point.
Yeah.
Okay. Connor?
The one I was thinking about before was Vigil: The Longest Night, and it's kind of got the same. It's a 2D platformer, but it's got kind of the Souls-like elements where you have to manage a stamina bar. There's a dodge roll, those kind of things. And it's got a few elements of Metroidvania style where you do a little bit of backtracking or you're rewarded for backtracking, which I think is also something that we see a lot in Souls series, where going back to old areas and talking to NPCs again when you've changed the world state yields like rewards or more information.
Okay. Yep.
And I kind of post Elden Ring lost myself in that game for a while.
Cool. I'll add
Yeah.
one to this list. Dead Cells. Dead Cells is basically a 2D platformer, so it's a 2D Souls-like side scroller effectively, but it has all the elements that we talked about. But rather than like having a bonfire or a save state, so to speak, that you operate from, you start the whole run over again, and it's a rogue elements because of that, and each run is a little bit random due to that fact, and you could choose different directions and paths to go and stuff like that. But that's definitely a good one to check out. Luke,
Another one would be Mortal Shell.
I watched you play
That
that
one
one. That one was
was
cool.
How'd you like that? I never saw the conclusion.
um it's all right. It's not a very content heavy game. Like it's maybe about 5 hours worth of gameplay. There's only like 5 bosses in it. But it's essentially a game where like the mechanic is instead of like having a parry button, you have a harden mechanic, which makes you invincible for maybe like a couple seconds or as long as you hold the thing. But it's something where you use it to interrupt your opponent's attacks and create your windows of opportunity. But you're also limited on that resource, so it makes you really consider how you use it.
Cool.
So like it centers the gameplay around kind of a parry-esque system, but limits your access to that.
No, there actually is a parry system in the game.
Oh, okay.
So you have the hardened system on top of a parry system. And
Interesting.
in my opinion, it's a better parry game than it is like the actual mechanic they want you to use.
Oh, unfortunate.
Yeah.
Connor.
So one that I haven't finished yet, I played it on stream a little bit. Is Ender Lilies? Quietest of the Night,
Yep,
I think is the full
I've
title.
seen you play that one. That's a 2D one, right?
Yeah, and it's more on the Metroidvania side than the Soul side, but you are a small girl and you summon the spirit of knights to help you, and you bind the knights. They all have their own attacks, and their own like attack sequences, and you bind them to different buttons on the controller, and you can have like 2 sets of 3 basically, so you can swap out move sets essentially, like switching weapons.
Okay.
And it's got a lot of platforming puzzle elements where you progress to a certain boss, gain a double jump, go back, you can go to this area. A lot of backtracking like that. But it throws RPG mechanics on top of it too. Like your summonable knights level up, and you can invest points into them to make certain ones better. A lot like honing a weapon in a Souls game.
Cool. Next one I want to add is Salt and Sanctuary.
I was hoping somebody put this one out.
That game is awesome. It's got this like weird stick figure art style to it, but the art style is really cool. Some of the bosses just look phenomenal. Like the dragon on top of the castle is just super cool looking, and then the alchemist in the forest. Oh my god! So the art style is awesome.
Queen of Smiles.
Queen of Smiles, and then the tree as well.
The tree is really good too.
But Salt and Sanctuary is a 2D Souls-like, so this is definitely like just a Dark Souls ported to a 2D platform essentially. And the story is pretty good. Basically a no-name adventure. It's the closest you can get to a Dark Souls game without literally being called Dark Souls. And I really enjoyed Salt and Sanctuary. I thought that was a great game. And there's a second one I haven't played yet, so I need to get on
Salt
that.
and Sacrifice. Luke, have you played this before I talk about it?
Salt and Sanctuary?
Yeah.
I have not.
Oh, it's good. You should. I actually played this. The first game has couch co-op in it.
Yeah, local
and
co-op.
It's actually it's actually pretty well implemented. Me and General Spaceman actually sat down and played most of the game in one sitting on arcade sticks. So it had a really really arcadey feel to it for a while. And then we wound up finishing over Parsec, and I really enjoyed my time in that world. I love the like your character looks like a potato person, and then the bosses are like super intricate looking.
Yep. Cool. Luke, do you have any more?
Yeah, Code Vein.
Okay.
That was pretty interesting. It's anime Dark Souls, and you're also a vampire.
Interesting. Kind of a smorgasbord of things.
Yeah, it's got an interesting resource management system because you get like special weapon skills, and like you can even use like magic and stuff, and you just have to go about managing your stamina as well as essentially like your magic supply or your skill supply, which is like the blood of others.
Okay. Cool. Connor?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really it that I've played.
Okay.
If you're familiar with the content creator Iron Pineapple, he does a series called Steam Dumpster Diving, where he will just pick random Souls likes off Steam and play them to completion.
I've seen some of those games. Yeah.
Some of those are really cool. Like there's one with a French fencer where you're kind of like a Three Musketeers-esque character. That's in early development that look really cool. But if you're like a fan of Souls likes, his series on that is so cool.
I do want to give a shout out to this because I know someone in the comments will be like, "Oh, you didn't talk about this," but I don't know if it's a Souls-like, so to speak. But Nier Automata, is that a Souls-like or is that more of a bullet hell?
I don't know. I haven't played that one.
Neither have I.
Okay, so we'll just skip over that one then.
I know Nier fans are a little crazed.
Yeah. Luke, I think you and I both played Remnant, and that one is kind of Soulsy. Like,
I was just about to bring that one up. Like,
okay, go ahead.
It's Dark Souls with guns.
Okay.
I've heard of that one. I had another friend say he really liked that one.
It is really good. It's kind of roguelike-y because you can reset your playthrough and just kind of go through the maps as you want to, and it does get a little stale though, especially the first one. The second one I heard is really good.
Yeah.
And I haven't dived into that one yet, but I'm excited about it.
The last one I want to shout out, and this is a Souls-like by the loosest definition, I guess, but it has a lot of elements to it that are similar, and that is Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Not the new one that came out, but the first one that came out. And it has a mechanic where when you kill monsters and bosses and stuff like that, you get a currency that you can spend on leveling yourself up, but it also has like Tomb Raider elements and stuff. So it's very loose definition of a Souls-like, but I can highly recommend that game. It was the first one was very good, and the story was phenomenal.
To derail a little bit, I don't know how we didn't talk about this up to this point, but a common trope in the Souls-like series is that if you die without picking up your bloodstain, you lose all your money.
Yeah, so you lose all your progress essentially.
I don't know how we got this far without talking about that.
I guess it's like it's such a permeated thing throughout all the series that we forgot about it. But,
right.
Yeah, I think that being said, we're approaching the end here. So again, thanks to Luke and Connor for coming onto the episode to talk about Souls-like games, and we should have either one of them or any combination of them, and possibly some new guests coming forward to continue our series on game genres. So thank you guys for hanging out and talking.
You're welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. And we will see you guys next week. All right, bye.